So I'm Quick Flash. That's my online name. My real name's Kevin Plaizier. I'm an Emuflight developer, not the only one, but I'm really the main developer. I've done most of the work with that. Yeah, I also work for my university as a drone pilot and engineer. So I've done a fair bit with drones over the years, but yeah.
So I think we should start with a question of because some people, as you say, you're an Emuflight developer, and people might ask, "What is Emuflight?" And I don't. I mean, that could be a really long story, but just can we sum that up so people have a sense of what that means?
Yeah, so Emuflight, it really grew out of the fact that the Helio project died and they open sourced their code. Um, and, over the summer of 2019, development started with this, updates to the Helio IMUF firmware, and eventually updates for all flight controllers, and actually allowing them to use the Helio IMUF filter, at least to some degree, on all flight controllers was actually implemented because of Emuflight. And so yeah, Emuflight. We're not a fork of Betaflight. We're a fork of Butterflight. Um, but we do pull in a lot of Betaflight code, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah. So Helio came along. The Helio released these flight controllers with the IMUF coprocessor, and Butterflight was the code that ran on that.
Yeah,
Helio went out of bit. Butterflight was a fork of Betaflight. Helio went out of business. All these guys who had Helio flight controllers and loved them were kind of out of luck. And Emuflight came along and sort of picked that up, right, and brought it back to life, but not just for the Helio flight controllers, but for any Betaflight flight controller. Is
yeah,
that fair?
That's essentially what happened when we came and picked it up. Unfortunately, there for a while, um, because I'm not the greatest coder in the world, I actually introduced a bug that didn't let the Kalman filter from the IMUF work properly for our first release, but
Yeah, I
it's
remember
now
that.
working. We've confirmed that, but
Well, I mean, that's. I mean, I think it's easy for people to forget that at the end of the day, there's a lot of these are just like passion projects and just normal people hacking away at them because they like it. I remember when Mark Spatz found that bug. Mark was digging into the filtering and looking at the gyro data, and he was like, "I don't think this filter's actually working." But that's not. I mean, that's just progress. You find the bugs, you fix the bugs, and work towards something better.
yeah. And what I kind of like to see it as is, people that still think our first version flew well, the IMUF filter wasn't in there. And so Emu Flight isn't IMUF flight. It's not Helio flight. It's, we've done so much other things that have nothing to do with filters that we're still unique. We're still different. And it's not just filters that makes us different.
Well, let's talk about that because one of the things that inspired me to take another look at EmuFlight recently is some of the features that EmuFlight has added, specifically as regards to micros. And one of the things I really love about this project is like the Betaflight project is it's big. There are a lot of contributors, and part of what comes it started out as being slow. I mean, it started out as being small, fast, nimble, and now it's grown and that you need something else to come along that's small, fast, and nimble, and able to incorporate some of this new stuff. So, what are some of the things that EmuFlight is incorporating that set it apart, other than the Kalman filtering and the IMUF stuff, which is maybe the sort of most obvious thing?
Essentially, the big thing that I've been doing is taking that idea of open source to heart and really just looking through lots of different flight codes. And some of that has just actually been to just learn how these softwares do things, how they work, actually learning how to code things, because Emuflight is where I've actually learned how to code. So I'm not, I'm not the world's greatest coder by any means. Um, However, I've looked through lots of different projects: Silverware, Betaflight, iNav, actually the old raceflight code that was open sourced a while ago. I've asked Preston Garrison. He says I can use whatever I want from that. So I've looked through there and I found things that I go, this is interesting. I like this stuff. And I've grabbed some of it and actually put it into Emuflight. So a lot of the big things that I've done recently has been Silverware code, especially angle mode code. And I've taken some of the same ideas that they have and implemented them right into Emuflight with some small tweaks here or there.
Yeah, like I know one of the things that we've talked about is the not fast enough flight mode, where on pitch you have acro control and on roll you have angle control, which sounds kind of like weird to me, but Whoop racers seem to really like it.
Yeah,
and
that's one of the things that I added. I've actually spoken to NFE or Not Fast Enough, and had some good discussions with him. He's a great guy, really like him. And so yeah, I've added the Not Fast Enough racer mode, angle on roll, acro on pitch. Another feature that's more Whoop related, but of course you can use this on any size quad, but we're calling it cinematic yaw, but it's really like the camera angle, the FPV camera angle adjustment parameter,
right, the up tilt
so
compensation.
If you're tilted, say like this, when you give it a yaw movement, it'll coordinate the turn for you.
Sure.
Upright. What we've added is kind of like one that slides, so as you pitch farther forward, it accounts for it even more. So no matter what angle you're at, yaw always does yaw
That's
the ground.
That is really slick, because one of the things that you have to put the camera angle in Betaflight, and it compensates for a fixed amount of up tilt.
Yeah.
And that's fine for acro. That's what you want for acro. But if you assume you're going to be flying cinematic, if you assume you're mostly going to be upright, or if you assume you're flying in angle mode where you literally can't flip over, then just the ability to just always be able to yaw based on whatever your up tilt is, that seems really obvious. And yet, if your focus was on acro and freestyle, you just never even bother.
You never think
so that's
about
pretty slick.
Yeah, and that's something that Silverware's done. So yeah, like you said, it's just in Betaflight, it's just a set angle. In Emuflight, you still need to set an angle just as like the maximum angle that it'll still have an effect at, because obviously you don't want that effect to be happening at 90 degrees. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, if it was working at 90 degrees, then yaw and roll would just do the same thing.
It just gets weird. So
yeah,
it'll keep boosting until you hit that angle that you've set, and then past that it just has the effect as if you had set it static to that angle.
That's really slick. Yeah, I could see that really making sense, because like I find that when I'm racing in angle mode, a lot of times when you fly acro mode, the stick is centered and you're making tiny little corrections. But when you have to be really deflected in pitch, like you're full pitch forward because you're racing, and then also you're having to make really little precise, roll moves, being able to just steer with the yaw stick might make more sense.
Yeah, I've actually heard some guys on like a 5-inch quad just setting up Not Fast Enough racer mode as well as the cinematic yaw. And they're just flying with their left stick, just throttle and yaw. They just set their angle essentially, let go of their right
pitch. Yeah.
And just throttle and yaw, and they can get around pretty well.
Wow, it's really blowing my mind. I mean, then you could put yaw on the right and fly throttle and yaw.
That's I actually fly mode 4, which is yaw.
Oh no, don't say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. Oh my God, ouch. No. Because you came from a gaming background, is that right? That's what people always ask.
Kind of. I wasn't much into first-person shooters, but I don't know. I started off flying fixed-wing planes, but when I got a quad, I realized that I was just never yawing it, so I just put yaw on the right stick, and I was like, oh, now I'm yawing all the time.
There you go. So you said you learned to code by studying all this stuff, and I think that's one of the best ways to learn about how this stuff works, is just to examine the code. And it's great that it's open source and you can do that. Certainly, when you said I learned to code by looking at this, I thought, do I really want this guy writing my flight controller software? No offense, but so far I haven't heard of any like major bugs except for the Kalman filter one. But like what I'm not sure how to phrase the question. I mean, should people trust you with their quads?
So that's a perfectly valid question. And, what's really my saving grace is when the project first started, I went through some effort getting people to know about the software and to get some people to fly it because it needs to be at least, somewhat worth my time and other people's time to code it to get, something that people will use. At this point, I don't care about advertising it anymore. I've got enough people that really love Emuflight. But the saving grace was as I did that, I was creating a team of testers. And so what's really great is I can write some code, and sometimes I write code while I'm in class at school, but I'll write some code. I can send it out, and I can have testers testing it within a couple hours. I can have people flying that code within a couple hours, giving me feedback, letting me know how it works, if it works, all that sort of stuff. And I think that that's really one of the powerful things that I have that kind of keeps me in check is I have all these other guys that can give me feedback and tell me, this feature you added, it really sucks. It's terrible. Or they can say, this is actually great. And I could go, okay, I didn't actually think it was great when I first did it, but they've played with it more. They've got it to work. And, just by having those testers there that can fly the code, flash it, test it, try it out, they can help me find these bugs. And it's not just, for me, just a one-man show. I'd flash it, fly it, see if it works, but I have multiple people. I've got freestyle pilots, racers, whoop guys, micro guys, some guys flying macro quads. So I kind of get a full spectrum of guys to help me test this stuff out, which is really key in, making sure that everything works right.
So I think people may be curious about the concrete things that Emuflight brings, that differentiates it from other stuff that's out there. And we talked about the filtering is different, the argument that the Kalman filter works better. We've talked about a couple of the features for micros. Can you think of some other sort of key features that might make someone, I want to try Emuflight. That sounds really cool.
Well, one of the key, this isn't really a flight code feature, but this is a feature that I don't know why Betaflight has never implemented it, but if you actually go to our GUI and you go to the PIDs tab, you'll see there's like the PID profile, the rate profile, little drop-down menu. And there's another menu that's presets. You click on that menu, and we have our testers coming up with their own tunes for their quads. It'll have their name, kind of what size or type of quad it is, and you can select one of those presets, fly it, and see how it goes.
Nice.
And,
nice.
That's something that I know Flight 1 has, but I don't know of other softwares that really do that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think if I had to guess, like the Betaflight devs would say, you can't just apply a preset. You have to know all the ins and outs of the quad, and they're right. But at the same time, like, what's the harm? And I mean, unless like the preset has just crazy PIDs and make you smoke your motors. But people just like when I flashed Falco X, I was like, well, let's just try the Willy preset. Let's just see what happens, And sometimes that works. Sometimes it just flies good, and then you don't care if it's perfect.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want, when people test our software, some of them they'll keep the default tune as like PID profile 1, put up like PID profile 2 as tune number 2. PID profile 3 is the next preset tune that they grab, and they just try a couple, go out, fly, see which one they like the most. Because to be honest with you, I've added some features and I had them set default not to do anything, just because I didn't want to mess too much with the flight fill, let people play with it if they want.
Mm-hmm.
People end up playing with it, not really. And I do think that there is some advantage to some of those features. And so, really just having these presets helps out so many people because so many pilots are just flash and fly and maybe
Yeah.
grab some tune they found online or maybe tweak it just a little bit. And by having presets, we've got testers that'll do a lot more of that fine tuning and tweaking that they honestly understand the stuff more because they're talking to me a lot more. But, I think that having those presets is quite helpful in that regard. That just there's so many pilots that are just already just going to flash and fly that if you can give them a better experience by having a handful of tunes that they can try from, that's just going to help out a lot of pilots.
Yeah, especially because as I look through the Emuflight configurator and I go to the PID tuning tab, I think a lot of people are overwhelmed by the PID tuning tab in any flight controller. But then Emuflight has a whole bunch of additional parameters that some of them are named a little bit like feathered PIDs or Emu Boost. And it may be hard for a lot of people to figure out what these stuff do. So the ability to just apply that preset is nice. What other resources are out there for people who might want to get a little deeper and learn about the development and learn about the features?
We have a wiki on our GitHub. Unfortunately, it's not super updated. I've not been the most good at that. I'm trying to get.
Well, you're too busy developing, right? That's where you think your passion is.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of the developing. I'm trying to get some of the other testers to kind of like take on some of these other roles so that I don't have to worry or think about it. But if you do want to learn, especially if you want to see the development, if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, not with every development release, but with a lot of development releases, I'll actually upload a video where I talk about the changes, what it does, make like a quick 5-10 minute video that goes over that. And yeah, it's just been kind of a better way for me to document things because I can just write the code, fly it, make sure it actually works. Then I can just sit down and just talk for a couple minutes and all of my testers know what I've added. I don't have to answer a bunch of questions.
Nice.
And if other people want to just watch that development, they can as well.
What about the you have a Discord server too, right? Should people join that?
Yeah, the Discord's really helpful. It's pretty active, and you'll usually get help from people pretty quickly. We've got a Discord. We've got a Facebook group as well.
One of the things I talked about with Patrick, I talked with him last night, is the difference between sort of seat of your pants development and sort of like mathematical development. Like there's a perspective for which you say the PID controller works when like the graphs overlap. You look at the black box and you make the PID response perfect. And there's another perspective from which you say, yeah, but I flew it and it didn't feel right. So how much of your development is sort of seat of the pants versus sort of mathematical black box lines?
So with my testers and everyone else that's using the stuff, I really like to see, after they go fly a new version, I do like to see that black box log. I like to just compare it to their previous black box logs that they've given me before, because I think that's better indication than just, oh, hey, one black box log, let's see what it does. But I can see kind of the progression of their logs as time goes on, because I know the pilots, I've got their previous logs saved. I can look at those, look at their new logs, see kind of how things are changing. So I do really enjoy seeing that, and I get some coding ideas from just staring at black box logs and thinking about how you can get things better. But then at the same time, even if it gives like a really nice looking black box log, but my testers are saying it feels terrible, then, what's the point? Because at some point, we're not, we're all human. We're not just some flying machine, we may be flying a machine, but do I necessarily care if the graph looks exactly perfect or if there's a little bit of excess noise or whatever? Do I really care about that if the quad feels like the best flying quad I've ever flown? If I fly a quad and I'm like, this is the best quad I've ever flown, I'd pay big money for a quad like this. And you look at the logs and they look like crap. I'm still going to fly that quad and I'm not going to care how those logs look.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I look at both because the logs can tell you a lot, especially when it comes to adding new features. It can tell you if it's actually doing what you want it to or if it's actually working. but at the same time, it doesn't give you the full story of how the pilot feels and how it
Can you
actually feels from the human perspective.
can you think of a case where you added a feature and like mathematically it seemed like it worked, but the pilots were like, nah, this isn't the direction to go?
Um, can't think of like a whole lot of that, but I mean, there's some times where I'm just, as an example, I look at logs and I can't really see one log being better than another. Like to me, the logs look, they look quite similar. It's like small nuances. And the pilot will say that one felt a lot better though. So I'd say there's more times where the logs are just not really telling much of a story, They give me all the flight data, but there's been some changes and they don't really tell much of a story that there's been changes, but the pilots are coming back and reporting that things are flying better, or that they like the feel more, or that they might like
Yeah.
it less. And I think that's more where I've run into things. I guess one example is kind of if you've heard of Emu Boost before.
Sure.
Um, I might want to rename some of this stuff as time goes on, but Emu Boost, it's really just a nonlinear addition to your P term. It has
Yeah.
a nonlinear boost to it. So normally your P term is just error times your P value, right? With Emu Boost, it adds a nonlinear section where as it gets bigger, it starts to get a lot bigger. So it's error plus a nonlinear boost to give you your P term. And that feature, if you look at logs, your P term almost always looks worse when you're using that. But for some quads, especially micro quads, they absolutely love flying with it. It doesn't
Interesting.
matter that it adds a bit more P term noise or does some other weird things. It just makes micros fly a lot nicer and smoother in the air. It can actually help get rid of some yaw washout issues by upping your Emu Boost on small craft. And some pilots don't like it on bigger things, and that's fine, but it does have its cases where it works really well. And in the logs, it doesn't always show as, making your P term or other things look nicer. But at the end of the day, it does fly better in some circumstances.
Interesting. Interesting. One of the topics that I think we have to touch on is sort of if you look at the history of Butterflight came out the gate with a real sort of, I mean, it's just my characterization, a real sort of FU attitude. There was immediate hostility between the Butterflight devs and the Betaflight devs. These guys, well, anyway. And I think a lot of people are going to wonder whether Emuflight is an extension of that, being a fork of Butterflight. But I don't think that's not how I've seen you kind of approach it. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't care what you fly. I'll continue to fly Emuflight. I know that there's other people that will continue to fly Emuflight, and that's really good enough for me. And, I actually really love the work that the Betaflight guys are doing, because it saves me a lot of work from having to do a whole bunch more code, because they're already doing it. And because open source, I can take it, use it, and I'll gladly give them credit for it. Like, a lot of the new Whoop features that I've added, that came from, Silverware. So if I go around, hating on Silverware, I'm just being a jerk, because I'm using their code. I actually love the stuff that they've done. I may not have just been able to copy paste it because, it doesn't quite work that way, but I'm able to take it, tweak it a little, do a few of my little changes to it, get it working. And, if I went back and said, oh yeah, not fast enough, you're terrible for developing Silverware and I hate Silverware, but I still use your code and I think it's great, Who am I to
Well,
say that?
that was one of the things. I mean, well, anyway, I don't want to. I'm risking going back and rehashing that old argument, but that is one of the things that sort of struck me as funny. Is like, if Butterflight came along, Butterflight made a non-trivial change to the PID and filtering code. No one can take that away from them. At the same time, like like 95% of their code base was Betaflight or whatever many lines of code. I don't know what the percent was. So like for them to be like, Betaflight devs are stupid, they don't know what they're talking about. It's like, well, you know, they did write most of your code. So I mean, maybe show a little gratitude.
Yeah, like
Anyway.
yeah, you gotta have respect for that. Like, although I don't agree with every decision that the Betaflight devs make or agree with all the stuff that they're doing, there's still, even if you just look at it from code that's not flight code, just all the drivers and all the infrastructure to actually get it to work, there's so much of that that you can't just say that, oh yeah, they're terrible, because a lot of those updates are things that some of that just goes over my head. I don't quite understand it. Like I said, I learned how to program last summer doing this stuff, so some of it just still goes over my head. And you know, that's just something I've come to kind of accept. I don't think there's one Betaflight dev that even completely understands the whole hierarchy of everything. It's just how massive the project is at this point.
I'm trying to think which Betaflight dev right now is going, that's not true, I understand it all. No,
You
anyway.
know, if they do, that's great for them, and I can applaud them for that. But that's a lot of work to get to that point.
It is.
With the thousands of files that make together, you know, the whole Betaflight project. It's huge at this point.
Let me ask you this. I mean, how much is there ever? I mean, the promise of open source is that you fork the code, you develop your own code, and then theoretically, some of the improvements you've made get merged back. Do you have any plans to submit any pull requests for any of these new features back to the Betaflight project?
I have thought about it. I know that some things I've added, there's no way Betaflight would put inside their code. You know, just a quick example is the way we do filtering differently. I know that they wouldn't take that sort of stuff, so I've kind of debated if I want to just go on a limb and just try to get some of this stuff added to just, you know, help everyone out, like adding not fast enough racer mode, because that's honestly fairly simple to add, or, you know, some other little things. But at this point, I'm not sure. Just part of it is just I don't have unlimited time.
Right.
Know, that's honestly one of the big key factors is I've only got so much time, and I want to do some of the stuff that I want to do. And, you know, when I start, you know, I'm still doing quite a lot with the Emuflight code. Like, as you know, we're currently our latest release version 0.2.0. And just a quick word on our naming convention. That first number is, you know, a major release. The next number is just a release. And then those last digits are for development builds. And that's mainly just been to make development easier, and I can track what my test team's doing and whatnot. And since Emuflight's based on Butterflight 3.6, which was essentially Betaflight 3.5, with a few minor tweaks, some annoyances, but what I want to do is grab essentially all the Betaflight code that they've done updates to, get all the way up to 4.2, because they've almost released that. Take all of their code, especially the code that doesn't deal with flight, but take huge chunks of that, add it to Emuflight, and then that'll be release version 1.0.0, and that'll be like our first real, like, we're now off the ground. We're to the point where we can actually be somebody at this point. And that's going to take quite a bit of work, and just like distracting myself with other things. At some point I do want to do it, but at the same time, I've just got so many other time commitments that
Sure.
it's holding me back. But if anyone else wants to do it, by all means, I completely support that. You know, it's not like, oh, that's my code, don't touch it.
No.
You know?
Yeah, this has always been one of the challenges. I mean, we saw this play out with CleanFlight, where Betaflight was a fork of CleanFlight, and Betaflight just developed so fast and got so far ahead that eventually Dominic Clifton just basically just copy pasted Betaflight into CleanFlight and was like, forget it, and just sort of did a catch up. And the further the pace of development on the core project can be so fast that just keeping up with their changes and sort of merging them into your project can take all of your development time. Do you see that being an issue? Or do you think you'll be able to keep up?
Yeah, I'm hoping that I'll be able to keep up. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want to do what Butterfly has done and just, oh, hey, we made 5 changes. Now we're just going to pull request Betaflight stuff and just copy Betaflight code. That's not the plan where I see Emuflight going. So, there's going to be some things that Betaflight will push out that Emuflight's not going to take. Prime example being VTX tables.
Oof. Well,
Or
I think most people would agree that that is a good decision.
yeah, so there's some things that we're not going to take because I don't understand why that was put in the code in the first place. But if Betaflight loves it, great on them. Good for them. But there's going to be some things that we're not going to take. We're not going to merge. But their drivers, some of their other really deep under the hood stuff, they've done good work on, and I'm going to take that.
Do you I know that Betaflight is working a lot on some architectural stuff, like the unified targets. Is there a risk that there will come a point where there's become sort of so foundationally different that you can't sort of easily pick and choose what you take? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can see that, and that is kind of one of the fears that I have with developing this stuff because right now Emuflight isn't a one-man team, but if you look at who's been doing most of the contributing, it's mainly been me. Without the other developers, we wouldn't be nearly as far as we are. They've helped out tremendously, but I've been, honestly, if you look at the commit history, you can see that I've been the guy that's written all the flight code that's been implemented since Emuflight started. And you can see that I've done a whole lot of the stuff. And I'm just kind of hoping that it doesn't get to a point like that, at least not anytime soon, at least not before we get some other good developers on there.
Yeah.
What I'm really hoping is if we get to a point like that Emuflight will be big enough and we'll have enough support from industry that support from industry will be able to keep us afloat regardless of the fact that we can't easily merge stuff from Betaflight.
Yeah.
And at that point, we'll still be able to take the key ideas that Betaflight's implementing and add that to our code when we get to a point like that. We won't just be able to copy every single line of code and just copy paste, but we'll be able to take the same idea and implement it at that point. And yeah, like I said, I'm just hoping that we'll be big enough that industry will care enough that they'll put in some effort to help keep us afloat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always the challenge. I think that all the projects sort of struggle with that there's all these companies out there that make hardware, for example, that runs the code, but actually getting development resources. Then you got all these devs who are essentially working for free, for fun, and when it comes time to sort of say, hey, can we have some help? A lot of times the help isn't there. So I hope that you can get the resources that you need to keep the project going. Let me ask you this: what is your favorite part of developing? Because you put a lot of work into this. What keeps you going? What motivates you to come back and write the code? Is it the coding? Is it the flying? Is it the community?
I'd say it's been a combination of a lot of things. Some of it's honestly just been the endeavor of getting a PID controller to work and to be able to tweak it and actually see some of those tweaks happening has been pretty cool to me. And so some of it's learning to code. Some of it's been that. Some of it's been, I genuinely do think that my stuff flies better. And so I enjoy being able to push out updates and see my own aircraft, my own quads fly nicer. And then I've got, my test team, those guys, and they're always super grateful and thankful. And then just, you go online and you see somebody, or, you're online, someone just sends you a message out of the blue. You don't know who this guy is. They just send you a message on Facebook and they're like, hey, I love the Emuflight code. It flies great. All my quads are flying it. And you see that and you're like, I'm actually doing something that, I just think about it. I learned how to code last summer and now there's thousands of people that have flown my code. And, out of those thousands, there's tons who really like the code and it's all that they fly, or it's primarily what they fly. And that to me is just really cool to see that. Another thing that I find fun is I said that I work as a drone pilot for my university, and the professor that's in charge, that's kind of my boss, he does find PID controllers fascinating and that kind of stuff, and he really enjoys that. And so I'll have conversations with him where we'll throw back and forth ideas, and I'll tell him some of the stuff that I've done, and I find that fun as well to do.
Yeah, there's absolutely no substitute for what you're doing in terms of sort of developing this kind of skill and understanding of how a PID controller, and specifically a multi-rotor PID controller, works. Like, can you tell us more about what you do at your university? Because you say you're a drone pilot. What do you do there?
Yeah, so as a drone pilot, I'll fly fixed wing drones. I'll fly, if you've ever heard of the Matrice 600,
Mm-hmm.
it's a big DJI drone, 6 props, 21-inch propellers, big guy. And so I'll work on building those aircraft, keeping them maintained, doing some updates to them. I'll also be the pilot for them. And what we use those for is just collecting imagery and, collecting like scientific type imagery of areas and then computing that. I don't do any of the imagery stuff. I just do the actual piloting and the maintenance and building and a bit of the coding and hardware, electronics, all that stuff.
Yeah, so I guess you fly the from the biggest down to the smallest, huh?
Yeah.
Those are those are insane. I remember you probably saw I got to fly the Free Fly Alta,
Yeah.
and just when you go, I mean, it's a whole other world when you're behind the controls of something that big and expensive and dangerous.
Yeah, it's a little terrifying knowing you're flying something that if you completely totaled it would be like $100,000 worth of just gone like that.
Yep, yep, it's insane.
Different feeling.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else? Is there anything you think we've overlooked, or anything you wanted to get to that we didn't get to?
Well, something that I was reminded of after you mentioned some things is just you were talking about kind of why I code this stuff. Reminded me of something. Just really that, I code. I fundamentally believe that, competition is a good thing. And if you look at stuff at this point, Betaflight doesn't really have any competition right now. You might be able to say, okay, KISS and Flight One are competition, but at some point, you don't really see any Whoops running anything but Betaflight. You don't see, there's just so many different manufacturers that only make products that work with Betaflight. So at some point, they don't really have competition because these companies will continue to make products that only work with their software. And I do think that some competition is good and healthy for, everyone involved in the industry, not an unhealthy, toxic competition, but, good, friendly competition is a good thing. And I do think that, just having some different development ideas and having projects that are going slightly separate ways could actually be healthy as far as an end product for everyone goes when it comes to flight controllers and software.
Yeah, I have some frustration sometimes with the Betaflight project, because they there's well, like, let's talk about VTX tables, for example. I had a big argument with one of the devs when this feature was announced, and I said this is going to make a whole lot of people's lives a whole lot more inconvenient. People are not going to understand this. And the response was more or less, we need to do this for this reason. And people can educate themselves and they can sort of deal with it. And I was like, well, okay, that's your perspective and that's what you're sticking with. And that's who you feel like you're accountable to, is not necessarily the end user experience. And if Betaflight is the only one who is making like you say, manufacturers are making Betaflight hardware, and that's because that's the most popular firmware, and so the hardware runs the firmware, and having the for people to have the option to go to something else and try it, what without having to give up their hardware, I think is really valuable, and to have a different perspective to say, let's try these things, and maybe these things don't work, and maybe they do, but when it goes back to what you said, which is at the end of the day, if somebody flashes the code onto their quad and they're happy with how it flies, that's all that matters. For someone to go, well, but look at the black box, the step response is that's all that matters, is that someone's having a good experience flying their quad, and that's all you really need to justify what you're doing.
Yeah, and if I can get more happy pilots in the air, then who's gonna be mad at me for that? Regardless of what they think about me or my code, there's more pilots in the air that are enjoying things. So,
yeah, awesome. Well, that's a good end goal. Cool. Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you for coming, and keep doing what you do. And if anybody else out there wants to be a developer, I guess if anybody else wants to work on Emuflight with you, I guess the door is open.
Yeah, I'd strongly encourage that. I'd welcome help.
Yeah.
Opposed to that.
Who knows, man? Maybe yours. I mean, this is more or less how Betaflight started, with Boris B. just making tweaks to CleanFlight. Who knows? Maybe years from now, this will be the next Betaflight.
Maybe.
And then some young punk can come along and tell you that you're doing it all wrong. No, you didn't say. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm trying to start trouble. I won't do that.
No, it's all good. If anyone tells me that I don't know how to code, I've not been doing it super long, but my stuff manages to fly. People manage to enjoy it. Some people prefer it to all other flight softwares, and I may not know how to code, but I can make something get in the air. So
there you go.
That's all you need.
Cool. All right, man. Thank you.
Yeah.